So, uh, please bear with me a little bit. This is a presentation that I've written on the back of some training that I did with Wikimedia UK called Train the Trainer to help me run uh, editing sessions and training events for Wikimedia UK and for Wikimedia LGBT. This is the first time I'm delivering this session. I've got half an hour on the calendar for it. If I get if somebody could let me know if we get to 25, like 5 minutes before the end of the session, that would be great. I don't expect that I'm going to use the whole session. But this is a guide for new editors writing queer biographies on the English Wikipedia. I, at some point, will work with people to expand this into other language editions. If you could go to the next slide, please. So, one of the first things we need to teach new editors about is the importance of notability, which determines whether or not something even gets covered in Wikipedia. The general criteria for that are looking at their work and their achievements and whether they're written about in reliable sources, be that books or magazines or journal articles or online. Is the person a member of any distinguished societies? So in the UK here, they might be a member of the Royal Society or the Royal Society for Arts, or they might have been acknowledged as being worthy of a state award, all of which in the UK have terrible post-colonial imperial names, so I won't bother telling you about them. Something that is worth noting is that if a person or a place or a thing is not notable enough to have their own page, you can cover them in other topics, in other articles, such as, for example, transgender history in the United Kingdom, or LGBTQ plus culture in Cardiff, or LGBTQ plus history in Peru, for example. I'm completely going to ignore the chat while I'm doing this, by the way, because I'm looking, all my notes are on this screen and the chat's down here. So I will glance at it afterwards. If we could move on to the next slide, please. We'll talk a little later about how we handle dead names and pronouns for living people, but I also want to talk about historical figures. For people currently alive, we can conveniently read what they say in interviews and on social media. That sort of access is obviously unavailable to us for people who are no longer with us, and we generally have to rely on written accounts that predate a lot of the terms we use today. This screenshot shows the lead of the article about the public universal friend, somebody who lived the first 24 years of their life as a young woman before falling very ill, after which they describe themselves as having died and been reanimated as an evangelist without gender, abandoning their previous name. Obviously, the revolutionary 13 colonies didn't have our current concepts about gender and identity, which are largely about as old as I am in some cases, and we shouldn't project those onto people for whom the concepts wouldn't fit. But also, as Dr. Kit Hayham points out in their excellent book, Before We Were Trans, A New History of Gender, and if I were more organised, I would have thought to have had that link ready to paste in the chat. We can also recognise them as having a recognisably similar experience to trans and non-binary people now. Next slide, please. Categories are a regular part of Wikipedia articles. They make it easier to find related content, but they're not restricted to a binary view on content. Apparently contradictory facts can simultaneously be true. The person who became the public universal friend was born in 1752, and they died in 1819. So it's accurate to describe them as being of both the 18th and 19th centuries. They were born in the colony that now forms the state of Rhode Island, and died in New York State, so it's accurate to describe them as being from both states. While the terms are anachronistic for the friend, they're arguably a part of non-binary and agender history, so it's legitimate for their biography to be in the categories non-binary Christians and agender people. And clearly, historical figures with ambiguous or disputed gender identity is a category that could well have been made for them. There are currently 33 people in this category, or was when I wrote the notes, and 75 in the analogous category, historical figures with ambiguous or disputed sexuality. If you want to read more about categorizing historical queer people, there's a specific guide at the short link of cat LGBTQ. I really must in future remember to make a document with all of these links handy. And that category includes a helpful summary, a broad consensus of academic and or biographical scholarship about the topic is sufficient to describe a person as LGBTQ. For example, while some sources have claimed that William Shakespeare was gay or bisexual, there is not a sufficient consensus among scholars to support categorizing him as such, while such consensus does exist about the sexuality of Oscar Wilde or Radcliffe Hall. I'll talk more in a moment. Sorry, next slide, please. I'll talk more in a moment about how we normally handle transitioning names for trans people of our own era, but it can be a little more complex for historical figures. The way that we have handled this for the public universal friend is broadly how they did so themselves. Next slide, please. In October 1776, Wilkinson, their dead name, contracted an epidemic disease, most likely typhus, and was bedridden and near death with a high fever. The fever broke after several days. The friend, new name, later reported that Wilkinson, dead name, had died. The friend further said that Wilkinson's soul had ascended to heaven and the body had been reanimated with a new spirit, charged by God with preaching his word, that of the public universal friend, new name. Describing that name in the words of Isaiah 62:2 as, quote, a name a name which the mouth of the Lord hath named. From that time on, the friend refused to answer to Jemima Wilkinson, dead name, ignoring or chastising those who insisted on using it. It's plain to see parallels here with how trans people commonly treat their dead names, but we can also see that the friend used their dead name to discuss their previous self. Next slide, please. Hopefully, this is where my prepared script has run out, so if I get a bit waffly, do tell me. So we have a detailed document as a part of the Wikipedia Manual of Style on gender identity. It's a collection of guidelines there, including community discussions and certain best practices. Next slide, please. And apologies for the loud cat who apparently wants feeding. If somebody was not notable under their dead name, it should not be included, even if it can be found in reliable sources. Avoid using sources that use non-notable dead names. So we see, for example, that Laverne Cox and Rachel Levine, their dead names aren't there in bold at the start because they weren't notable under those names. It's not relevant to their biography. So we should avoid phrasing like Jane Smith, formerly John Hammer, born whenever. Next slide, please. However, if somebody's dead name is notable, then it will be included in articles, even if we would rather it not be. And so we see Chelsea Manning and Elliot Page's dead names bold in the opening few words of their biographies because that's considered biographically essential. Personally, I disagree. That's a fight we're not going to win right now. Next slide, please. But even when people are notable under their dead name, we should avoid misgendering or dead naming them in prose and paraphrase quotes in order to do that. So where we could say, Critic X said Juno needs a fine actor to play its pregnant teenage star, and Elliot Page has shown himself to be the perfect man for the job. That's really awkward with all those square brackets. And we could just as easily say Critic X argued that portraying the pregnant teenage lead in the film Juno required a fine acting talent and said that Page had proved perfect for the job. Oh, helpfully I did write script for some of this. So I'm going to go back to something I wrote for the previous slide. So no matter how much some of us might prefer that dead names not appear, the key principle here is of helping readers and not surprising them. If a reader looks up Elliot Page's dead name and is not aware of it as a transition, they might be surprised to be redirected to an article about a male actor. And that's why his dead name appears in bold in the opening sentence of his biography. Some biography subjects object to this. The French writer Jules Marot has written about how seeing their dead name on the French Wikipedia causes them dysphoria. But we are required as editors to accept the community consensus here. And whether we approve of this widespread publication of notable dead names or not, it's not acceptable to start what's known as an edit war, where editors might go backwards and forwards, removing and restoring a dead name. Coming back to this slide, I'll do this more elegantly next time. Likewise, we avoid confusing readers, so we don't state that a trans woman fathered a child, and we avoid highlighting people's dead names in credit lists. Next slide, please. Coming back to the public universal friend, we can see a good example of how we generally handle this. We explain the difference. Should have read the title here, shouldn't I? When interpreting queerness in historical figures, we explain the different historical interpretations of a subject's biography. So researcher X said Y, writer A said B. Next slide, please. And remember that we're writing for an encyclopedia, so we need to phrase things appropriately for that context. A key part of neutral point of view is avoiding advocacy. So we avoid stating opinions as fact. We avoid stating seriously contested assertions as facts. We prefer non-judgmental language, and we indicate the relative prominence of opposing views. The text on the side here shows how this is handled in a footnote to the article about Edward II, King of England, and his relationship to two of his favourites. And like with Sappho and her roommate, they weren't just roommates. Obviously, we can't just say that Edward definitely was sleeping with Piers Gaveston and Hugh Despenser, but we can't straight wash away the prospect and not mention that he may well have been. So here we can see how we describe four historians presenting in different ways that there was a sexual relationship and two suggesting otherwise. We name the writers and summarize or quote their perspective without passing judgment or stating any of these views as being empirically true. Next slide, please. So we describe disputes, but not engage in them. And yes, we all know that this is not a strategy without its faults, as is very clear in some topic areas that may recently have been at the arbitration committee. But a neutral characterization of disputes requires presenting viewpoints with a consistently impartial tone. Otherwise, articles themselves end up as partisan commentaries, even while presenting all the relevant points of view. The tone should be impartial, neither endorsing nor rejecting particular points of view if reliable sources don't back that up. Instead, we summarize and present the arguments in an impartial, formal tone. Next slide, please. We back up statements with evidence from reliable sources, and fact-checking helps with sifting that information. And I think that is the end of my slide deck. How did I do on time?
You still have some time, but that is really nice, and this is
how much time do I still have left out of
interest? You have about 13 minutes.
13 minutes. I'm happy to take some questions, though I am going to scroll up and glance at the chat, and I can assure you the kitties are not wasting away. I should change my camera to the one that I'm actually looking at the screen of now. That's better. And rearrange my best so that there we go. So let me scroll up and see what you were all saying. Yeah, there are conflicting suggestions about Mr. Shakespeare, but certainly it's not hard to believe that somebody who was in theatre, darling, may well have known some people who were not entirely cisgender and heterosexual. Go ahead, Max.
Yeah, I just had a question. I mean, we know each other, but as I mentioned in the chat, queer and specifically and non-binary and trans bios are my specialty. So thank you for covering this topic. I just wanted
And
to
if
ask,
there's,
how do you, sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, if there's anything that I could improve on that basis, please do message me.
Oh, yeah, no criticism at all.
Thank you.
I just wanted to ask your advice on how we deal with the um, constant accusations that just talking about trans people or respecting trans people or LGBT people in general is somehow violating NPOV. I mean, to us, this is just pure homophobia, transphobia, and we can dismiss it. But there are very prominent people like Elon Musk creating Grokpedia and all this, again, we see this as nonsense, but the mainstream media is covering this kind of thing like it's real. So how do we react to this in a way that explains, neutral point of view doesn't mean just point of view of a straight cis person. you,
I
you
think,
understand what I'm saying? I
oh,
might not
I
be.
very much
I've
do.
got 4 hours sleep, so I might not be explaining this well, but I think you
I,
understand what I'm trying to say.
yeah, I have very much, in the context of equity, diversity, inclusion work in my day job, I have frequently talked about the idea that some things are political, by pointing out the questions of, are you white or are you political? Are you cisgendered or are you political? Are you straight or are you political? Are you a citizen of the country you reside in or are you political? Like, are you a native English speaker or are you political? Are you a man or are you political? Like, equality isn't politics and representation isn't politics. And no matter how much we want to, some people just don't want to hear that. They're not going to listen. They don't care how much evidence we throw at them because they're not always good faith actors. And I know certainly in the space of the Wikimedia movement, we're meant to assume good faith, but also we're not meant to bend over backwards to continue providing good faith to people who are demonstrating they don't have it. And I, you might have seen that I was relatively quiet throughout the arbitration case on the English Wikipedia recently, and partly that was because it seemed to me that the transphobes were doing actually quite a good job of proving our point about, I can't remember the term we use, but the bluster and bludgeoning, about bludgeoning, about taking a battleground mentality. Like, several of those transphobic editors, and don't call them that on Wiki, it won't help. But several of those clearly transphobic editors were being criticised for putting huge amounts of words into any article talk page where they were trying to prove a point, and then did exactly the same to ArbCom in their evidence, and did exactly the same on the talk page for the decision. And to some extent, I think they managed to harm their own cause that way. To other extents, I was profoundly disappointed, but not especially surprised by how poorly the arbitrators on the English Wikipedia managed to handle some aspects of that case. And as I said earlier, I think it's outright obscene that everyone's friendly neighborhood sociologist was treated quite so poorly there on the basis of being argumentative. Um, but as I've said before, it's the firm position of the user group and my personal position that I have said repeatedly, including to members of the Foundation Board of Trustees on their CAC community, their talk to the community calls, that we do not believe that there are any functioning on wiki abuse processes that manage to handle queerphobic abuse. And partly that's an inevitability. We're talking about sites where most functionary and privileged roles are done by a majority vote. The majority of users on the English Wikipedia are cisgendered heterosexual people who don't necessarily understand queer identities well. And so we don't get as well represented. That's a bit less of a problem amongst administrators than other functionaries, but not very much so. And the same is the case in U4C. I'm going to scroll back through the chats, and you've got your hand up, BC. Are you wanting to tell me something?
I've got a very interesting question here.
Go
on. And it's Peter Pata. It says, why is there a higher bar to pass for historical queer figures compared to a heterosexual? It seems like you can categorize a person as straight very easily, but with queer people, you need heaps of sources. Yeah. Why is it that easy on Wiki? I mean, it's not as if I think you have the answer to it, but I think
I have an answer for it. It's that majority groups don't understand that they are privileged, in the same way that a substantial proportion of white people in the United Kingdom don't understand racism because they've not experienced it themselves, and too few of us have friends of colour who can help us understand that on a more personal level. It's just that in order to help people, help other editors and contributors understand that it's not political to talk about queer identities, that it's not controversial to talk about queer identities, that we're not pushing some point of view, acknowledging things that are in historically reliable sources, but they don't get that. And for some of those people, loss of majority privilege feels like an attack. And I'd suggest that's why the political far right are resurgent currently across the global north. Like, we've seen it here in the UK, they've seen it there in the US. The far right and their politics of hatred are very popular among some people who aren't necessarily intrinsically bigoted. They just don't understand better because they've not had the opportunity to learn. And don't get me wrong, plenty of them are intrinsically bigoted, bad people. But, there are people who, thankfully not my mother, but people like my mother, people that my mother knows, who live in a small community in a very, very white part of the country with almost no people whose grandparents weren't born in the UK. And almost all of the people whose grandparents weren't born in the UK probably run a restaurant. Like, there are plenty of places in the UK that are like that, where they don't bump into people who aren't like them. So they don't learn that actually people who on the surface don't appear to be like them, actually we're all the same. Like, we have differences, but I have differences from my mum, And so I think the reason we have to fight for queer representation in a way that straight people don't have to fight for cis het representation is because the majority just doesn't get it. I think I'm overrunning now, so I'll take the question from John Samuel.
And then we can go to break.
Ask it quickly. It's about the page on Elliot page. Did we have any case where people objected to seeing their dead names appearing? Like, Elliot page is very, very popular, and their dead name is also very popular. So both are notable. So I think Elliot had no big issues, but did we have any case where people
Yes.
objected? Okay.
The most prominent one is Jules Marot on the French Wikipedia. And I don't know if they have also objected on the English Wikipedia, but Jules Marot wrote a series of Instagram stories probably about 18 months ago about how seeing themselves being misgendered and dead named on the French Wikipedia gave them physical reaction of gender dysphoria. And if you follow up with me later, I can share some of that with you. I know I've got the Instagram story saved to our Google Drive because I've used it in user group presentations before.